When you saw the headline, North Korea opened a museum, the natural assumption was propaganda, another controlled spectacle from the most closed regime on earth, a country where 40% of children are stunted from chronic malnutrition, according to the UN World Food Programme's 2023 report, a country where you can be sent to a political prison camp for watching a foreign film, where electricity is rationed to 4 hours a day in the capital. That assumption is not wrong, but it is nowhere near the whole story, because the museum is not the story. The museum is a signal. And the question nobody on television is stopping to ask is this: a signal of what and sent to whom? Here is what I actually see when I look at this museum opening. I see a victory lap. And a victory lap means someone won. The question that should stop you cold is this: if North Korea, the most sanctioned, most isolated, most economically pressured country on earth, the entire Western alliance spent 70 years trying to collapse, if that country is now holding celebrations and opening museums, who exactly lost? Not North Korea, and if the side that lost was the American-led world order, the rules-based international system, the sanctions architecture, the entire structure of post-Cold War Western dominance, then what you just witnessed was not a museum opening. What you just witnessed was a eulogy for the world order that most people alive today grew up believing was permanent and irreplaceable and undefeatable. By the end of this analysis, you will understand three things that mainstream North Korea coverage will never connect for you. First, what this museum actually represents in strategic terms, and why analysts who study civilizational collapse recognize its significance immediately, even though most journalists do not. Second, the exact mechanism by which North Korea broke free from 7 decades of Western maximum pressure, and why that mechanism is now a template available to every other sanctioned country watching. Third, what comes after a world order dies, who fills the vacuum, and what the transition period, the interregnum, historically does to people living through it. Now the anchor number for this entire analysis, 4,700. That is the number of North Korean soldiers confirmed killed in Russia's Kursk operation, as of February 2025, according to South Korea's National Intelligence Service. Another 11,000 confirmed wounded. Those are not estimates. Those are intelligence assessments from a country with the most sophisticated North Korea monitoring apparatus on Earth. A country does not send its soldiers to die in another country's war unless it has received something of extraordinary value in return. What North Korea received and what Kim Jong-un extracted from Vladimir Putin in exchange for those soldiers' lives is the key that unlocks every other layer of this story. And you need to understand exactly what that exchange was before we go any further. Let me start where this story actually starts. Not 2024, not even the beginning of Kim Jong-un's rule. Start in 1953. The Korean War ended, technically, with an armistice. Not a peace treaty, an armistice. Which means, on paper, that war has never ended. For 71 years, the Korean Peninsula has existed in a condition of suspended war, held in place by American military presence in the south and by the threat of American power applied to the north. The strategy that followed, the strategy America used to manage North Korea, has a name: maximum pressure. Impose the most comprehensive sanctions in modern history. Isolate the regime economically. Starve it of hard currency, technology, and international recognition. Create internal contradictions severe enough that the government collapses on its own, or the population rises. This strategy was not new. It was the same logic applied to Cuba after 1959, to Iran after 1979, to Iraq through the 1990s, to Russia after 2014. The logic was always identical. Any government that defies the American-led order will be made to pay a price so severe that either the leadership submits or it falls. North Korea was the supreme test of this doctrine. If maximum pressure worked anywhere, it had to work there. A country of 25 million people, entirely dependent on foreign trade for fuel and food, with no allies willing to openly break sanctions, with China playing a complicated double game, keeping North Korea alive enough to serve as a buffer state, but not functional enough to become genuinely threatening. And yet North Korea did not collapse. It built nuclear weapons. It built intercontinental ballistic missiles. It conducted 6 nuclear tests between 2006 and 2017. And by 2017, the combined intelligence assessment of American, South Korean, and Japanese analysts concluded that North Korea had achieved a viable nuclear deterrent, a weapon that could plausibly reach American cities. Bruce Klingner, former CIA station chief for Korea, stated it plainly in a 2019 congressional testimony. North Korea has successfully crossed the threshold. Maximum pressure has not and cannot reverse that achievement. That was not a diplomatic softening of language. That was an admission. But here is the connection that almost nobody made at that moment in 2019, and almost nobody is making now. North Korea did not just survive maximum pressure. It proved, empirically, verifiably, undeniably, that maximum pressure can be survived. It created a proof of concept visible to every sanctioned government on Earth. The proof said, if you absorb enough pain for long enough, and if you build a nuclear deterrent before you run out of time, the Americans will eventually have to deal with you as an equal. And every government watching, Tehran, Caracas, Minsk, Naypyidaw, understood exactly what had been demonstrated. That is the strategic context in which Vladimir Putin met Kim Jong-un face-to-face in Vladivostok in September 2023. Putin did not see a desperate client begging for scraps. He saw a country that had endured what Russia itself was now being asked to endure. He saw a government that had outlasted the pressure. And what emerged from that Vladivostok meeting was not simply a weapons transaction. It was the architecture of something larger, something that the museum opening in Pyongyang in 2025 has now made permanent. Something that requires you to understand a specific exchange, one that the Western press has covered at the surface level, but has not followed to its logical conclusion. Because what North Korea received from Russia in exchange for those 4,700 dead soldiers is not what most people assume it is. It is not money. It is not food. It is not diplomatic recognition. What it is the most dangerous knowledge transfer of the 21st century. Now here is what nobody is actually saying out loud, and this is the part that should make you stop completely. Those North Korean soldiers were not sent to Russia to help Russia win a war. They were sent to buy something specific, and what they bought, in exchange for their blood in the Kursk Oblast, is now on its way back to Pyongyang inside classified technical files. And once it arrives, the Korean peninsula will never be the same again. Let me walk through the transaction precisely, because precision is what the headline coverage is missing entirely. North Korea sent between 10,000 and 12,000 soldiers to Russia, confirmed by South Korea's National Intelligence Service as of November 2024. The confirmed casualty figures, 4,700 killed, 11,000 wounded, come from the same source, February 2025. These soldiers fought in Kursk Oblast, inside Russian sovereign territory that Ukraine had briefly seized. They were not advisors. They were frontline infantry. In return, Russia transferred to North Korea specific technical capabilities in 3 categories, and each category is more consequential than the last. First, reconnaissance satellite capability. North Korea's Malagyong-1 satellite, launched November 2023, was assessed by outside analysts as partially functional, capable of basic imaging but limited in resolution and orbital control. By late 2024, Russian technical assistance had measurably improved North Korea's ability to track naval movements. A country that previously could not monitor American carrier groups in the Pacific can now do so. Think carefully about what that changes. Second, submarine-launched ballistic missile technology. The Korean Central News Agency confirmed in January 2024 that Kim Jong-un personally inspected the Hero Kim Kun-ok, a new nuclear-armed submarine. The missile. Systems on that submarine carry technical signatures consistent with Russian caliber-class architecture, according to the assessment of the Naval Warfare Studies Institute, April 2024. A country that could threaten South Korea and Japan from fixed land-based positions can now threaten them from underwater, undetectable, mobile, survivable in a first strike. Third, and this is the piece that matters above everything else, re-entry vehicle technology. A nuclear warhead is useless without the capacity to deliver it accurately through atmospheric re-entry. The physics of a missile falling from space at extreme velocity create enormous heat and pressure. If the warhead cannot survive re-entry, the weapon is theoretical, not operational. North Korea's ICBMs had long been assessed as capable of reaching American cities in theory, but with uncertain re-entry vehicle reliability. The South Korean Defense Ministry stated publicly in December 2024 that North Korea's ICBM re-entry vehicle capability had, quote, advanced significantly. They did not say Russia, they did not need to. That is the 3-part transfer, satellites, submarines, re-entry. Now connect this to what it means for the structure of American power. The architecture of American dominance in the post-Cold War era rested on 3 specific pillars. The dollar system. Any country that defies America can be cut off from dollar-denominated trade and the SWIFT payment network. Military superiority. The cost of direct military confrontation with the United States is too high for any state actor to sustain. And the sanctions toolkit. Comprehensive economic isolation applied to any government that steps outside acceptable behavior. North Korea has now methodically eroded all 3. The dollar. North Korea and Russia conduct bilateral trade in rubles, yuan, and direct commodity barter. $0 exposure. The sanctions toolkit. North Korea receives Russian fuel, food imports, and military technology through a supply chain that bypasses every Western financial checkpoint. The toolkit has not been dismantled. It has been routed around, and the routing is now permanent infrastructure, not improvisation. Military deterrence. North Korea's re-entry vehicle improvements move its nuclear threat from theoretical to operational. The cost of military action against Pyongyang is now genuinely existential in a way that it was not in 2017. And with a Russian mutual defense guarantee in place, signed in June 2024 under the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty, a military strike on North Korea carries the explicit risk of a Russian response. And the museum. The museum Kim Jong-un opened in early 2025, the expanded wing of the victorious Fatherland Liberation War Museum in Pyongyang, explicitly documenting North Korean military cooperation with Russia, is not aimed at the North Korean population. It is a message to Washington, to Seoul, to every government on Earth that has been watching whether the old rules still apply. The message decoded is precise. We were sanctioned and starved for 70 years. We survived. We built a deterrent. We allied with Russia. We sent our soldiers to fight in Europe. And now we are opening a museum. Come and stop us. But here is what makes that message catastrophically important in 2025 specifically. And this is the part where the story stops being about North Korea at all. Here is where the three threads, North Korea's survival, the Russia partnership, and the collapse of maximum pressure, all converge into the scenario that nobody in Washington is willing to say plainly on the record. There are 5 countries watching the North Korean model right now with extremely close documented attention. Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, Myanmar, Belarus, each under Western sanctions of varying severity, each examining the same playbook, each reaching the same conclusion. The exit from Western sanctions exists. North Korea found it, and the path is marked. Iran's case is the most immediately consequential. The International Atomic Energy Agency's February 2025 report stated that Iran possesses sufficient enriched uranium to construct multiple nuclear weapons within weeks, if it took the final technical steps. The IAEA's own language was direct. Iran has no credible civilian justification for its current enrichment level. Iran is not watching North Korea for inspiration. Iran is watching North Korea for confirmation of a decision it has already made. Venezuela's Maduro government, under American sanctions since 2019, with those sanctions partially lifted in 2023 and then reimposed, has systematically deepened its relationships with Russia and China, built alternative financial channels, and established commodity barter trade that bypasses dollar systems. The North Korean model applied to an oil-exporting economy. Before we go further, something here deserves a full stop. The human cost inside North Korea is not an abstraction, and it must not become one in this analysis. The United Nations Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in North Korea, its landmark 2014 report, still the most comprehensive documentation available, documented systematic crimes against humanity operating across the prison camp system. The UN Special Rapporteur's 2024 report estimated that between 80,000 and 120,000 people are currently held in political prison camps. These are real people. Parents separated from children by decisions made in Pyongyang, in Washington, and in Beijing decades before those children were born. Every geopolitical calculation that follows in this analysis must be held against that reality. It does not disappear because the strategy debate is important. Now, the worst-case scenario. The gap between what American officials say publicly about North Korea and what the documented evidence shows is now wider than at any point since the first nuclear test in 2006. What the official position says, maximum pressure remains in effect. The sanctions regime is functional. North Korea is isolated and contained. What the documented evidence shows, North Korea exported a confirmed 3 million artillery shells to Russia in 2024. According to South Korean government assessments, December 2024, it deployed 10,000 combat soldiers to a NATO-adjacent combat zone. It received advanced nuclear delivery technology in return. It now holds a mutual defense treaty with a permanent UN Security Council member, which means no Security Council resolution targeting North Korea can pass without Russian consent. That gap between the announced pressure and the observable reality is not a messaging problem. It is not a communications failure. It is structural evidence that the toolkit itself, the sanctions architecture, has been compromised at the foundational level. Every student of great power competition knows the pattern that follows when a primary tool of coercive power loses functional credibility. You are left with 2 options: military action or acceptance. Military action against a nuclear-armed state with a Russian mutual defense guarantee and improved ICBM reentry capability is not a serious option in 2025. The mathematics are prohibitive. The escalation ladder goes directly from conventional conflict to nuclear exchange with no intermediate step that either side can reliably control, which means the option that remains is acceptance. Accepting North Korea as a permanent, legitimate, nuclear-armed state with a Russian security umbrella, with functioning alternative trade networks, with satellite and submarine capabilities that did not exist 5 years ago, is what the museum opening actually represents. Kim Jong-un did not open a museum because he felt like celebrating. He opened a museum because he calculated, correctly, that nobody could stop him. That calculation is the most significant intelligence signal about the current state of the world order that any serious analyst should be examining. Because it is not a North Korean calculation, it is a global one, and the 5 governments watching it are drawing their own conclusions right now. What I want you to take from this is not fear. Fear is not useful. What is useful is the map. Because when you understand the structural pattern, when you see the system rather than the headline, you can see what is coming before it announces itself. And the map here is readable. The death of a world order is never a single event. It is a process, and the most dangerous interval in that process is not the collapse itself. It is the interregnum, the period between when the old rules stop working and when new rules get established. History has a record on this. The post-World War II order was constructed between 1944 and 1949, Bretton Woods in 1944, the UN Charter in 1945, the Marshall Plan from 1948, NATO in 1949. 5 years of deliberate architecture building after the old system collapsed. And during those 5 years, during the interregnum, the Soviet blockade of Berlin nearly triggered a second war. The Chinese Revolution remade the most populous country on earth. Korea ignited. The interregnum was the most dangerous period, not the war that preceded it, the gap between orders. We are in that gap now. The honest counterargument, and it deserves a serious hearing, is this. North Korea has been declared victorious before, and those declarations were premature. After the 2006 nuclear test, analysts said maximum pressure was finished. After the 2017 ICBM tests, analysts said the West had lost. The world order absorbed both shocks. Sanctions remained. The regime stayed isolated in key dimensions. And the argument is that 2025 is another data point in a long performance of defiance that has not actually changed the fundamental balance. That counterargument has weight. It is not dismissible. But here is precisely why 2025 is structurally different from 2006 and from 2017. In 2006, Russia was not a military partner. In 2017, North Korean soldiers had never set foot in a European combat zone. In neither year did North Korea hold a mutual defense treaty with a permanent UN Security Council member, which means no Security Council action against Pyongyang can now proceed without Moscow's veto. And in neither year had North Korea demonstrated the re-entry vehicle improvements that make its ICBM threat credibly operational rather than theoretically plausible. Those 4 variables are new. They are not rhetorical. They are documented and assessed by the intelligence services of every major allied government. What North Korea has purchased, with its soldiers' lives in Kursk, with its artillery shells and missiles delivered to Russia's front lines, is not recognition. Recognition is irrelevant to Kim Jong-un. What it has purchased is irreversibility. Here is what to watch. Watch Iran's next enrichment decision, specifically whether it crosses the 90% enrichment threshold that signals weapon-grade material. Watch Russia's next arms transfer to North Korea, specifically whether advanced air defense technology follows the re-entry vehicle transfer. Watch China's posture toward Taiwan shift in response to a world where the North Korean precedent has been established. Those 3 signals will tell you which direction the interregnum resolves before any headline names it. The world order did not end because someone defeated it on a battlefield. It ended because the cost-benefit calculation that sustained it, the calculation that said defiance always costs more than compliance, was empirically falsified. North Korea did the falsifying, over 70 years, one test at a time. And the museum is not propaganda. The museum is a receipt,